It is important to me and to President Kaler that our actions align with our university's mission to be a high-impact research university where the humanities, arts, sciences, technology, and medicine and law come together to create a just and thriving world. Quite simply, creating equitable access to clean, affordable, and reliable energy is one of society's most pressing needs. The concept of energy justice is working to ensure that marginalized communities, often disproportionately affected by energy-related issues, have a fair share of benefits with reduced environmental harm and opportunities for socioeconomic development and advancement. With all of these combined, we could achieve a more inclusive and sustainable world. Clearly, a pursuit Case Western Reserve has long been at the forefront of achieving, and environmental justice has been in existence among our Great Lakes Energy Institute, our Social Justice Law Center, and the Coleman P. Burke Center for Environmental Law, who I will also note are all co-sponsoring today's event. These institutes are working in tandem with our leadership every day to advance sustainable energy technology, to promote social justice, and to provide critical research, policy, and advocacy. And while we have more work to do, I am proud of all that we have achieved together as a university. Now, without further ado, it is my honor to tell you more about today's distinguished guest, the Honorable Shalanda H. Baker. Director Baker stands at the forefront of the energy and environmental justice movement, shaping policies and advocating for equitable access to clean energy resources. With a career spanning academia, advocacy, and government service, she has dedicated her life to addressing the most pressing challenges of our time. Currently serving as the Director of the Office of Economic Impact and Diversity at the U.S. Department of Energy, she also holds the critical role of Secretarial Advisor on Equity. Before her appointment to the Department of Energy, Baker was the Deputy Director for Energy Justice, making history as the nation's first incumbent in the role. A prolific author and scholar, Baker has penned numerous articles, book chapters, and essays that delve into renewable energy law, energy justice, policy, and sustainable energy development. She brings a wealth of knowledge, experience, and dedication to her role in shaping a more equitable and sustainable energy future. Members of the audience, it is my honor and pleasure to welcome the Honorable Shalanda H. Baker, and let's give her another round of applause. Director Baker, now that you have been properly welcomed to Case Western Reserve, I will turn the program over to my esteemed colleague, Professor Jonathan Adler, to get this conversation started. Jonathan is the Johann Verheij Memorial Professor of Law and founding director of the Coleman P. Burke Center for Environmental Law. Jonathan, go ahead and take it away. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Board. Thank all of you for coming. Thanks to the Great Lakes Energy Institute and Social Justice Law Center for also co-sponsoring this, and certainly thank you, Director Baker, for showing up today. It's always a pleasure to be able to host someone who is worked as an academic and is now turning the ideas and the things they worked on into policy and into action, and that's certainly something that is great to see. So welcome. We're thrilled you're here. It's fair to say you're one of the people that helped identify energy justice as a concept, as an issue, put that idea on the map. You wrote a book about it in 2021, Revolutionary Power. You've described it as the goal of achieving equity in both the social and economic participation in the energy system, while also remediating social, economic, and health burdens on those disproportionately harmed by the energy system. Can you explain a bit about what made you focus on this as an issue that as a country we needed to focus on, and how you decided to conceive of it in that way?
Yeah, how much time do we have? I know we have the hour,
yes.
but it is such a journey. But before I answer, I just want to say thank you so much to this community for coming out to hear about a topic a lot of people don't know about. And Professor Adler, thank you so much for extending the invitation. I know the provost has had to, oh, actually she's there tucked in the corner. Thank you, Madam Provost, for having me as well and providing such a beautiful welcome. Yes, so it's great to be back in the law school, first of all. And I know you guys are very busy, so I appreciate you coming out. So my journey is an interesting one. I think the way I got to energy justice has a personal aspect as well as a professional aspect. So I was a project finance lawyer. That's what I did right out of law school or after clerking. And I was building all sorts of energy projects in the US, but also in 2008 had the opportunity to go to Japan and spend a year there as the world fell apart. And I got to Japan a week after Lehman Brothers filed for bankruptcy protection, a couple weeks before President Barack Obama was named our nation's next president, and it was also the hottest year on record. And I went to law school because I wanted to work on social justice issues. Because of the price tag of law school, though, I did find myself, being a corporate lawyer. But that year in Japan really had me sort of in an existential crisis. I was thinking about the climate crisis. I was thinking about the financial crisis, which in many ways was spurred by the design of our global financial system and a lot of the ways we distributed risk throughout the financial system. And I was inspired by the nation's first Black president. And so I did what I never advised my students to do, but I quit that job without having a real plan. And I moved to Mexico on a one-way ticket. There were a few things that happened in between, but suffice it to say, I landed in Oaxaca, Mexico. Yeah, such a beautiful place. The second forest state in Mexico, home to no fewer than 14 distinct indigenous groups that speak distinct indigenous languages, but is also what I discovered is the windiest place in the world. So Oaxaca is ground zero for Mexico's energy transition. And when I was in Oaxaca, I met indigenous peoples that were fighting against large-scale wind energy development. And when I met teachers and farmers who were saying, our land is being taken in the name of clean energy, we are not being consulted. Many of our community members are being threatened, and many of them are signing contracts in Spanish when they don't speak Spanish, they only speak indigenous languages. When I heard that, a light bulb went down my spine, and I realized that that would be my work. There was no name for it then. In fact, it was really unpopular back in 2009-10 to suggest that we should start thinking about social justice issues, indigenous rights issues, in the midst of our fight against climate change. In fact, many scholars even, environmental scholars, were sort of so focused on climate policy and making sure we got climate policy onto the national agenda and in the mainstream that when I brought up issues of social justice and indigenous rights and sort of the impacts of our transition on those on frontline communities and indigenous communities, people are like, please don't talk about that. Literally, please don't talk about that. We can deal with the equity issues on the back end. And so fast forward, I got back to the US through the mentorship of a lot of great professors of mine who were like, oh, get back to the States. We know you want to teach. So I was able to become a law professor, and my second teaching job was in Hawaii. And so I had spent time as a fellow in Wisconsin writing about indigenous rights, writing about how we embed indigenous rights into our energy transition. And when I got to Hawaii, I had a front row seat to that state's energy transition. So Hawaii in 2014 decided to adopt a 100% renewable portfolio standard, which meant that it was going to, by 2035, get all its energy from clean energy sources. And the state was really organized around energy. So it is a small place, so within like a month or two, you can meet everyone who's involved in energy policy in the state. So I got to Hawaii, and my friend Maxine Burkett, who is a climate scholar and also served in the administration, said to me, you have a blank slate to create something at the law school related to energy. And of course, a lot of law professors would have created an energy policy center or program, but I started talking to communities, and I talked to every single person who's involved in the energy transition in the state, policymakers, regulators, utility execs, people from the Sierra Club, and community members. And in every conversation with those who had been in the conversation for about a decade, at the end I would say, well, where do communities fit in Hawaii's energy transition? And to a person, they looked at me like I had three heads. They were like, what? Communities, where do they fit? What do you mean? And it sounds so foreign now, but in 2014-15, folks were not thinking about communities in the energy policy conversation. And many folks there said, all communities care about is if the lights go on. I knew that was wrong, because when I looked out over Hawaii, I saw West Oahu, which is a majority Native Hawaiian, majority Black, low-income part of the island, where every single dirty industrial facility was located. Those communities were also low income, so they were paying a disproportionately high amount of overall income to meet their energy needs. They were environmental justice communities, and so many issues plagued them. And they weren't getting access to clean energy, so they couldn't get access to solar, they couldn't get access to some of the things that more affluent communities in Hawaii had gotten. So I said, they have to be a part of this conversation. Again, it was really new to talk about energy justice, but at that point I said, I'm going to create something called the Energy Justice Program in Hawaii. And so that was radical and revolutionary then, because again, the idea was that our transition was just a technical one. And the question was whether we could get more solar on the grid and how to figure out the technical challenges of that intermittent power. But again, it was really a social technical transition, one that had to involve communities. So fast forward, I'm here, I started another organization in my time, the Initiative for Energy Justice, which was really about bringing energy to scale, bringing community conversations in the energy policy debate to scale nationally. And so I was able to start that with two other lawyers. And so my professional journey on the surface, it sort of logically has led to this place where I am in the administration. But personally, as I have learned more about energy justice, I realized my story, my personal story is wrapped up in this as well. So on my father's side, he grew up in a town called Port Arthur, Texas. How many of you know Port Arthur? Leslie knows. Not many. The provost knows. So Port Arthur is on the border between Texas and Louisiana. It's part of the Golden Triangle, and I'll talk about what that means in just a sec. But it's the birthplace and epicenter of the modern fossil fuel industry. That's where oil was discovered almost 100 years ago. And so it has become a place that we in the environmental justice literature call a sacrifice zone. It's a low-income, majority Latinx, majority Black community. It was thriving at one point, and we went back in June, and it's pretty much gutted in terms of its economic prosperity. But it's called the Golden Triangle, though, because when you look at this place using satellite imagery at night, it is littered with light. It's filled with light because of the density of petrochemical and petrochemical industry facilities and refineries. It has one of the largest refineries in the world, all in this low-income Black and Latinx community. So my father grew up in that place, and like so many people who grew up in that area, he died way too young. He died in his early 50s. And so the lifespans are shorter there. People die of cancer, heart disease, and other ailments related to impermissible and illegal emissions. I learned about that, though, on my own journey as an academic, writing about and thinking about energy and the effects of our energy system on communities. On my mother's side, though, I was raised by a single parent in Austin, Texas, and my mom was a government worker, so low to moderate income, salary, or income. And, we grew up in Austin, which is where there's a pretty low energy costs relative to other parts of the country. But every month she was juggling bills, trying to figure out how to pay for our energy. And there were nights in the winter where we would boil water on the stovetop, trying to get hot water for our baths. I'm seeing some nodding heads in here. The data tells us that 1 in 3 Americans suffers from energy insecurity, which is what I grew up with. It's an invisible problem. The data also tells us that 52.2% of Black households suffers from energy insecurity, and 47% of Latinx households suffers from energy insecurity. These are things that are invisible, because it's not about starving. It's about lacking access to reliable energy resources. So I think my personal story and then my professional journey, where I bounced around from Japan to Mexico to Hawaii, have all informed why I'm here and why I do what I do every day.
Well, now you're here, and
Yes.
you're essentially the first federal official to have been given this portfolio. Initially with the one title before you were confirmed, because you can't do the job. You can't do the one job until you're officially confirmed for the thing you're pending. It's one of those things we do in Washington. But what has it been like in terms of being you didn't step into a position where someone had done this before in the Department of Energy, so you've kind of had to stand up or create and establish this portfolio in a department that historically has not focused on these issues. So if you could talk a little bit about that.
Yes. Oh my gosh, I love that question because it sort of acknowledges how hard this job has been. But I will also say it's been the thrill of a lifetime. It's been the honor of a lifetime. I feel like, again, all paths have led me to this place. So the Department of Energy, it's a research and development enterprise. I had applied for some Department of Energy funding with other scholars who do other energy-related things in other disciplines. But I had never heard of this office called the Office of Economic Impact and Diversity, and many people hadn't heard of it. But it's been around since 1978. And so when I was asked to lead basically the just and equitable energy transition for the country from the Department of Energy, they said, well, you can work in the Secretary's office, or you can work in this office called the Office of Economic Impact and Diversity. It has some problems. It's like, mainly a civil rights and EEO shop. Historically, it's been a place where, folks have sent underperformers. And I was like, well, send me the statute. Like, what was the statute that animated this office? And so I took it out and I read it. And in 1978, this office was created to advise the Secretary of Energy on issues of policy impacting communities of color, specifically in 1978. So it has a policy mandate. Second, the office is set up to perform research and analysis on the impacts of the energy system on communities of color, including issues of energy burden, including socio and environmental issues. Okay, research mandate. Third, the office was set up to ensure that Black and brown businesses, minority business enterprises, are part of the energy economy. Okay. Last, the office was set up to ensure that minority serving institutions, those who serve majority students of color, have a part in taking advantage of DOE programs. I said, sure, being in the Secretary's office would be really cool, but this office has the bones to do this work. So I came into an office that was majority civil rights and EEO lawyers. That's not in our statute, but because it's where a lot of Black and brown issues emerge, they put that office there. So, okay, I had 34 people in the office, 35. Most of those folks were lawyers. No one was doing policy. 3 people were working on issues related to minority serving institutions. No one was doing business stuff. And I was like, okay, I gotta build this team. So from day one, I started running. I called everyone I knew in the national lab infrastructure. So I read a lot of literature being produced out of the National Renewable Energy Lab, Lawrence Berkeley National Lab. I knew people were doing research on issues of low-income solar access and those sorts of things. Were they doing energy justice? No. But I interviewed about a dozen people, and I came up with 5 people to come on my team temporarily to stand at my energy justice program. It was actually great that I wasn't confirmed yet because I had the freedom to build a policy team. I spent 2 or 3 months building a policy shop. Congress gave me double my budget from $10 million to $20 million. It sounds like a lot, but it really isn't. But I was able to build a team now that has all 4 elements of our statutory mandate filled out. I have 100 people now on my team. So we have grown exponentially in a very short time. It's been a thrill. I've never led a team of that size. Letting go of some things has been a challenge. And at the beginning, I was in the weeds on every single thing. Leslie knows this. She was around at the beginning, in the early days. And Leslie's my special advisor, and she's another political appointee. It's been a lot of really great work building the infrastructure. In terms of the politics, though, and I know that you're really familiar with politics in DC, convincing a research and development agency that justice matter has been a challenge, but also one that I think we're finally getting there on, right? So the Secretary of Energy, Jennifer Granholm, former governor of Michigan, is the real deal. She has made justice the forefront of what we do with the Department of Energy. Of course, it's consistent with the president's own vision of how we're going to do this energy transition. And that cover has given me the authority to kind of go into any single office at the department and ask for receipts on justice. I mean, there's a lot we've done. I can talk more about the architecture next or in the future, but we have actually been able to succeed, I think, in embedding equity and justice in everything we do with an amazing team that I'm really proud to lead.
And that actually was going to be my next question in terms of concretely kind of what have you done thus far? What kind of is in place? Obviously, Congress enacting the Inflation Reduction Act has given a lot more resources. There is still a lot of controversy over how to balance development of low carbon technologies and renewable fuels, but also doing so in a way that's fast and cheap, but also one that allows community voice. That's a tension that you're at the center of. So we would love to kind of understand what you've been building out, and in particular how you've been dealing with that tension, which is at the heart of so much of what we're doing in energy policy right now.
Yes. Well, so I just want to say, obviously there are so many students in the room, and many professors who may have already served in former administrations or may serve in future administrations. I will say that when I came in, I was like, okay, we're all going to do this together. It's a whole crew and a posse that was brought in to do this work, and they're like, no, it's you. Like, you're the energy justice person. Tell us what to do. And I was like, okay, well, I've written a lot about this. So I took the components of energy justice from the literature. There's procedural justice, distributive justice, recognition justice, restorative justice. It mirrors the environmental justice literature. It mirrors a lot of climate justice literature. And I said, okay, how do we actually make this framework, this intellectual, this theoretical framework, real in Department of Energy programs and policies? So that's sort of theoretical frame that animated my work. But the president gave me some great tools. So on day one, the president issued an executive order on equity, 13985. And in that executive order on equity, he said we're going to look at all the barriers that underrepresented folks face when accessing government resources. At the Department of Energy, we weren't yet serving communities because our budget was mainly research and development money. The bipartisan infrastructure law and the Inflation Reduction Act, we now have $100 billion to spend on infrastructure. We're no longer an R&D organization, we're a development organization as well, an agency. So we have $100 billion, and again, I'm thinking about my theoretical frame. Okay, how do we animate that within this $100 billion spending? Because the president issued that order, though, it meant that we were actually able to talk about equity in a real way at the agency. The secretary appointed me as her advisor on equity. I stood up a team comprised of senior leaders across the agency to lead our equity work, where we did a whole analysis of barriers, and we created the DOE's first ever equity action plan, which was released last April. We have our second equity action plan that we'll be releasing hopefully soon. But that was one way to start to get that buy-in and get people comfortable with this idea of equity. On day 7 of the administration, the president gave me another great tool, and that was Justice 40. So Executive Order 14008, Tackling the Climate Crisis at Home and Abroad, which a lot of climate advocates were really happy about, also had a justice element. Section 223 of that order made this commitment, which was unprecedented, and that was that we were going to make the commitment as a federal family that 40% of the benefits of our climate and clean energy spending were going to go to frontline communities. We're going to go to disadvantaged communities. That was historic, and it still gives me chills to think about it. And so again, I'm thinking about, okay, how do I take Justice 40 as a policy tool and move it through this intellectual framework of energy justice? So Justice 40 allowed me to do 3 things. First, identify communities. So the executive order said the White House was going to do that. But I was watching and I said, we're not getting there yet. And so I had my lab team, and I said, let's create a map. So we looked at 36 data sets, we layered them together, and we created a map that allowed us to identify disadvantaged communities by census tracts. So we were the first agency in the federal family to provide a map that we still use, which identifies communities by disadvantage. So the data sets are there, all of that information is public, so we have a map. The second thing Justice 40 allowed me to do was identify programs that fell under the umbrella. So a lot of my colleagues across the agency were saying, well, I run a program that's about technology, I run a program about, fill in the blank. I'm not a Justice 40 program because I don't serve communities, and I said, but that's not what the order says. The executive order says any climate or clean energy program is now a Justice 40 program. So there was a lot of negotiation in the first year to now get 146 DOE programs under the Justice 40 umbrella, the highest number in the federal family, which is nearly every single program in the building. And so that was the second thing it allowed me to do. The third thing it allowed me to do is create a policy framework around benefits. And so we have 8 policy priorities related to energy burden, related to access to solar and clean energy, related to business development and creation and job creation, that now every single one of our 146 Justice 40 programs has to embed in its design. So how does that policy framework get into the instruments that we put out the door? As I mentioned before, I hadn't really applied for DOE funding in the past. But the way we drive policy is through our funding opportunities. Those are policy documents. So if you're a scholar applying for DOE funds or NSF funds or other types of funding, you look on the website and you say, oh, there's an opportunity for me. It's about, fill in the blank, whatever the thing is you want to do research on. So now, if you're a company applying to do project development through the bipartisan infrastructure law, and you're applying for DOE funding, you now have to do a community benefits plan. That's historic. It's never been done. We fought for that. So any applicant has to put together a community benefits plan that says, first, I'm going to engage communities in this way. So actual stakeholder engagement. The second is, here's how I'm going to deliver on Justice 40 and the benefits that and the policy priorities that you told me I need to highlight and prioritize. Third, here's how I'm going to create good jobs, high-paying jobs. And fourth, here's how I'm going to partner with minority-serving institutions and minority businesses. Every single applicant for the first time in history has to do that, and it's 20% of their application score. When that hit the streets, it hit like a shockwave. I had CEOs calling me, I had industry, utility executives. How do we do this? How do we do this? And this is the framework that now animates an intellectual framework that talks about procedural justice, which is connecting communities to the policy debates and conversation. The second is distributive justice. How are we actually making sure the benefits of programs flow to communities without giving them the burdens? Third, restorative justice. How are we actually going to heal communities through the work that we're doing? How are we going to lift up those who've been left behind? And then fourth, recognition justice. Recognizing that not every single community is the same, so we're giving developers the latitude to create frameworks that work as they're applying for these funds. But you had a little Easter egg in your question, which is about the controversy. And so I'm not sure how many of you are studying environmental justice or if you study justice-related concepts, but I'm just going to give a spoiler here. Our country's inequitable. The structure and design, not a surprise to many of you, but the structure and design of many of our programs and policies have historically harmed folks, which has now led, especially in the energy system, it's now led to an energy system where the majority of fossil fuel generation is in low-income communities, is in Black and brown communities, is in indigenous communities. So as we're thinking about the transition, we're looking to technologies to capture carbon from a lot of those facilities, to convert many of these facilities to hydrogen facilities, to create a new economy that is a clean energy economy, but is built on top of an inequitable and disproportionately burdensome fossil fuel economy. So the dilemma is, how do you do that without again burdening the communities that have already been asked to bear so much in the fossil fuel economy? So that is now the work. How do we ensure that all the things I'm asking people to do in their community benefits plans actually are deliverable on the ground? And the communities are telling me, you told me before you were going to create jobs. And also, I don't want a job that's going to kill me. So this is the work that we're engaged in. And I have a call at 2:30 to talk about this very thing. I mean, every day, we're struggling with this, but we're grappling with legacy injustice and legacy inequity, even in our clean energy transition.
Obviously, there's a lot there to tackle. There's resistance, political, structural. I suspect that given the way the federal government interacts both with state governments and local governments, that there are conflicts that arise there. And I just was curious if you could say a little bit of what you see as the biggest challenge, the biggest obstacle, in terms of moving this work forward.
Yeah, I think there are three. The first obstacle is power. I'm hoping law schools still talk about power a little bit. Power is embedded in the rules that we make and the policies and programs that we design. Legacy power, though, means that certain communities are never assumed to be legitimate partners in the conversation. And so we're now grappling with the idea that folks have to give up some power in order to make this energy transition successful. And so even among my colleagues in the building, the idea that a community member should be involved on day one in the discussion is a challenge. But for me, we can't have a successful energy transition without that power being redistributed. There's no world in which we have a gleaming, clean energy economy and half the country is still burdened by energy costs. Half the country is still breathing in, toxins and, all of the things that are still a part of our energy system now. We can't have that. It's untenable. And also, the transition won't be successful because folks are going to fight all those projects that are coming in their communities. Second, so power. Dealing with power, understanding how we redistribute it, understanding how we create space for power, dynamics to shift, how we do that as a federal family, what our role is in convening players to distribute that power, how we hold space for communities to be a part of that conversation. That's the work that I do every day with my team. The second problem and barrier, I would say, or issue, because nothing's a true barrier, we're going to fight. The second issue is urgency. The urgency of the moment. I mean, this is what I was up against in the early days when people were like, please don't talk about justice right now. Because we have a climate emergency, you may have noticed. We don't have time to talk about justice. We're going to deal with justice issues later. Literally, people told me that verbatim. But the urgency of the climate crisis makes it really hard to slow down. Engaging communities, for any of you who've been a part of community-based organization or have done community work, takes time. That's the restorative justice piece. Sometimes your first community meeting is a disaster. People walk out, people are yelling, tables get flipped, and then you come back and they're like, okay, well, let's hear more about what you have to say. But urgency means that a lot of times people don't think we have that second pass. And for me in the Department of Energy, my colleagues for the first time are engaging communities and like, oh, that didn't work. It's like, let's go back. Actually, it's a process. We build the trust. So the urgency is a challenge. And then the third is community capacity. So we've created these tools now at the federal level. We have not only the DOE, but other agencies that have billions of dollars to spend. And we're saying, we're going to flood communities, states, local governments with these dollars. I talked to the mayor today. I talked to community advocates here in Cleveland today, and they're like, we're hustling to figure out how to make sure we grab that money from the money tree as that flows into communities, right? And if we don't make sure there's community capacity to do that, that money is going to flow through an inequitable system. We're going to replicate, this is my argument, replicate the existing systems and structures of power and inequity, which means we've lost an amazing opportunity, an unprecedented and historic opportunity to redistribute power, to redistribute wealth, and to make sure that communities come along with everyone as we have this transition. So we're trying to build capacity every day in our work as well.
So you mentioned you met with Mayor Bibb this morning. Can you share a little more about, I guess, your reaction about how these issues are playing out here in Northeast Ohio? Because as you may know, Ohio has quite a few energy-related controversies, some of which have resulted in prosecutions, but also huge disputes about state power versus local power. in ways that wouldn't map onto any of our kind of academic models about how we would think through what sorts of decisions should be made in what way. And so any thoughts or reflections you have on your meeting with Mayor Big would be
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I'm first of all, I'm just kind of in awe of what's happening in Cleveland specifically. The mayor is forward-leaning. He's forward-looking. He seemed like a real visionary to me in terms of the energy issues and climate issues. You know, the folks that we met with after the mayor, though, were fascinating. I mean, the mayor was fascinating, but the community members, there were like 20 people around the table. There's a coalition. CEAC, I think is what it's called, and they were so organized, and they've been organizing since pre-bipartisan infrastructure law, pre-Biden administration, around what this community can look like and its future. So the fact that you have a set of community organizations that are so engaged is, to me, extraordinary. We've been in other communities where there isn't that, where you can't fill a room with advocates when there are lots of problems happening in the community. So that was extraordinary. The power question is interesting, meaning the public power versus investor-owned IOU question, and the power purchase agreement that you guys have with them, coal-fired facility, et cetera. I mean, all of that was something that I learned today, and I think it's an advantage to have a municipal power provider here, given the goals that many of the community members shared with me, and the goals that the mayor has around clean energy and rooftop solar adoption, community solar, and the ways that those types of interventions can actually move the needle at the household level in terms of costs. So I was excited. I left so energized with so many ideas about how we can share models from here with other communities that are similarly situated around the country. So I'm inspired.
Well, that's great. Well, we only have a little till the top of the hour, and I'm sure I have tons of questions, and I can keep asking them. But I figured there are probably questions from the audience. So if folks have questions, and we'll go to Victor first.
Sorry, I don't want to take time away from the students, but I really have, this question is just so important to me. So I've been so pleased with what's happened, right? I was on the other side of, somebody coming to me and go, what do we do with this community benefits thing? We've never heard of it, So I'm so excited to see that in the energy development space, and it's doing a lot of things. But it still strikes me that it is dealing with environmental and energy justice at local levels, and that's critical. That's super important. But I feel like there's a bigger picture of energy and environmental justice at the national level. Eileen Gauna wrote an article in 2008 about how all of these local NIMBYs, people are like, no, we should be able not to have this here, or not that all is pushing everything into the sacrifice zones of the Gulf of Mexico and all of these things. So in this national transition, what's the big, how do you do the justice big picture? Or is it we're just gonna wait and let it build up from the community level?
Yeah, so, for those who haven't been tracking probably as closely as Victor, the bipartisan infrastructure law creates industrial policy, and $12 billion or so of that that's coming to the Department of Energy is for community programs, so state and community energy programs, mainly formula programs. So that 12 and now 16 billion is divided among all the states in different ways for different programs like weatherization, et cetera. It's not a lot of money at the end of the day. The other $86 billion that we have is for industrial energy projects like carbon capture, like hydrogen. We have $8 billion for hydrogen, we have $8.5 for direct air capture, a smattering of billions for carbon dioxide pipelines, $3.5 billion for battery manufacturing and recycling. So those are industrial projects. That's a national policy framework, right? It's a national decision around how we want to become energy secure, how we want to fight the climate crisis. Congress decided we're going to do that by doubling down on hydrogen. We're going to do that by focusing on carbon management strategies, a variety of them. And so I came out of the solar and wind world. I mean, I've written a lot about that. I understood a lot about the way we implement solar and wind on the ground. But when I saw the bipartisan infrastructure law, I thought, oh my gosh, how do we translate these industrial policy frameworks and break them down enough that they do become manageable at the local level. For me, the community benefits framework, it's not the perfect solution. I mean, this is a highly negotiated process, but it's one way that we do elevate community voices into the design of these local projects. We are also, I mean, that's now embedded in every single thing we do. So if we're going to be spending our $100 billion for the next 5 to 10 years. I do see that as a national strategy in many ways. I mean, it's the way the energy department is trying to do this transition. We've done so many briefings to the White House. We've done so many briefings to other agency partners who are like, how do we do this? So that work, that sort of broader idea of redistributing resources to communities, those ideas are now filtering into the way DOT has done some of their work, filtering into the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, which is a $27 billion fund that we helped design the implementation strategy for. So, you know, it's imperfect. I just didn't see another way to think about how we get to some of the siting challenges, the other local challenges that necessarily emerge when you're bringing industrial scale projects into communities. But maybe I should have called you. But no, I mean, we'll see. The jury is out. We just issued a lot of awards. We have billions of dollars that are now in the hands of corporations to do a lot of this work. Doesn't change the fundamentals of development. That's the next chapter, right? Where we change some of the fundamentals. But I think we have a good start on justice for now.
No questions. Yes.
This is probably a broad question, but especially wonderful to have someone like you who cares and is doing this work to answer it. I can never get over how hard it is for the most impacted folks in any community to actually have, you know, if you're working, you're an hourly wage earner, to actually have the time to participate, right, at a grassroots level. Especially if you're young, you're not even retirement age, right? Nothing, and let alone vote, right? How can you, I mean, is there financial means that you are able to use or allowed to use to help mitigate that? So, you know, folks that are wage earners that are taking the 2 hours, transferring the bus to get somewhere can actually be part of the conversation.
Yeah, I mean, so someone told me that I was a community activist. I was like, that's interesting. I don't know if I ever identified as such. But my work with communities before joining the administration did tell me a little bit about some of those challenges and how communities think about engagement and are able to engage in many of these policy debates. At Department of Energy, I mean, my office is trying to lead the way in showing best practices on how to do community engagement. Some of that is always compensating, you know, community members for participation. You know, we had a lot of those discussions early on in the administration because when we had this whole equity and EJ and all the different justice frameworks come out, people were like, oh, we need to talk to this community. So the same community members are being approached again and again and again to give tips and, you know, tricks on how to do justice. I was like, they're getting tired. So, you know, that was a part of that conversation. But the other way my office is really leading is we have a small, our budget is not huge. Our normal budget at DOE, meaning the whole department, is about $42 billion. My office has like pennies to the dollar to that whole budget, like so small. But we do have some money, and we are giving a small grant to an HBCU to actually do that community capacity building work to show how grad students, public policy students, law students can actually help community members figure out how they want to engage corporations and other entities in the community benefits plan process, how they can actually be at the table. So that's the conceit of giving that money to help to build some of the capacity for community voice. But you're talking about a structural problem that we're trying to get at, we're trying to mitigate through the work we're doing. There's also just a ton of philanthropic money out right now on the streets where philanthropic leaders are trying to think about how this transition can be successful. And every time I talk to them, I'm like, we need community capacity to make sure community members can be at the table.
Yes, hi.
Hi, thank you so much for coming today. My question, it's two parts. So I'm wondering, I'm from Detroit, but I was still able to see what happened to Sorry, can I use that?
I don't mind. Thank you. Wow, look at that. I feel famous. No, I'm kidding. So I'm from Detroit, and when I was in high school, the issue with the Flint water crisis was really prevalent. So I'm wondering how your office plans to build trust with communities such as those, to actually believe in government entities, and then also if there's a move to think about more broadly how to interact with indigenous nations, because as you stated earlier in your spiel, there's some diciness around energy justice regarding minoritized groups. So that's my question.
Sure. So we were in Detroit yesterday and Ann Arbor. We had a great day there. Detroit's so fascinating. It's such a vibrant place. So the question is, how do we build trust? We know that a lot of that trust has been broken. I mean, one of the things that I think the transition team and president's advisors have done a really good job of is bringing in people who already have some relationships. So the White House has the Council on Environmental Quality, which has an environmental justice division, and many of the people in that actually come from organizations that serve communities, so that helps to bridge some of that legitimacy. We also have the White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council, or the WEJAC. There are public meetings, and this was established in this administration under that executive order I talked about, the climate order. And this is an advisory council of around 40 people from communities. Now, we're now still in the storming phase, which is to say there's still a lot of anger around various issues, some legacy issues, some new issues related to implementation of Bill and IRA. But the WEJAC is one way that we're trying to help, and it's not my office specifically, but it's the White House, it's this administration priority to ensure that community voices are involved in the broader conversations around climate and the transition. The other thing that I want to say about the trust building is we just issued as a federal family, and this came from EPA, $177 million for TIC-TACs. These are driving communities, technical assistance centers. So 2 of those centers are in the Midwest. One is in Chicago. A woman named Naomi Davis got that grant. She's amazing. Blacks and Green. And basically every single center, the other is in Minnesota, the other Midwest center. And I think the University of Minnesota is the lead on that. But every single TIC-TAC has a consortium of different organizations that are working together to make sure communities are aware of this flood of dollars coming into states, into local communities, and that community-based organizations can grab some of those dollars and be a part of the transition. So that's another way I think we're bridging and trying to build relationships. In my office, we have a couple different stakeholder engagement folks. They have a lot of relationships. They hold relationships. We have people come into DC a lot. And whenever a community-based organization is in DC and I'm available, I meet with them. And so now I have multiple folks who I've met on Zoom, I've met in their communities, I've met in DC, and that's when we continue to build trust. And what I tell those community members is, do your job, which is to say, hold us accountable for the work. Hold us accountable for the promises we've made. And I have those community members say to me, okay, we're not coming for you personally, but we're going to come for you. We're going to come for the administration to be accountable to what we voted for in November of 2020. So that's how we maintain those relationships in the building.
Well, there are tons more questions we could ask you about, but we are at the top of the hour, and there's apparently a class or something that we have to make space for. It is still also, but thank you so much for those remarks. Thank you all for coming. Please join me.